we wear these ones. Okay, shall I start? Yeah.
Yep.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Dr. Christopher Warren. I'm a past student of Griffith University in the Gold Coast. And of course, first, I want to very much deeply thank Professor Susanna Beckham and Associate Professor Alexandra Coglan for their supervision, management, and cajoling of me through my PhD, which was fabulous, and hopefully the outcomes of that will be helpful to all of you today in terms of how I've used that PhD to stretch it, shall we say, stretch its use. The point of me talking to you is to really address the issues of how you should look at your PhD, not from a supervisor point of view, not from writing a PhD, but how to use the PhD to further what matters to you. So what I'm going to discuss is maximising the impact of that PhD. So I'm going to cover, obviously, the limitations. I should cover the scientific aspects of this presentation, and what value the PhD might have for you. Talk about how we can improve the outcomes for you, how we could be targeting other people, and then how do we do that and cut through the noise of everyday life. And also, we shouldn't wait till the end. We should be doing this from the beginning if we can. And I know this sounds a bit dreadful, but you as a brand, I say it's a bit dreadful because we're humans, but how can you stand out in the crowd? So that's my scope. So limitations, I've got lots of limitations, but limitations in this context is that my presentation is obviously my view. It's a sample of one, and I'm like everybody, different. I'm slightly older than probably everybody, or probably a lot older, or 3 times older than everybody here. So obviously my life experience comes to play about how I've treated or approached my PhD. I have had industry experience, and I'm talking about the PhD that I undertook, which is social science and not a science base. And as I'm not great at maths, physics, chemistry, and so on, and biology, I'm not going to make comments on using a PhD from a research science point of view because I don't know, but I can guess. And so I'm going to guess some suggestions, okay? So those are the limitations. But of course you can overcome all these because you can reflect on your strengths and the way you see life. We all have different personal backgrounds and you can draw on them. So draw on those and take everything I say with a pinch of salt and mix it up to what fits your life. So what's the value of your PhD? Do you know? Have you thought about it? Everybody seems nowadays to want to do one, even me. And I was not a very successful person at school, low average, I'm dyslexic, and was on the sort of lower end of society's opportunities, career opportunities because of that. But later in life, I had the opportunity to do the PhD, and it appears to be so does everybody else. Because now, lots of people are doing PhDs. In fact, I understand from what I read to prepare for this presentation, there are 64,146 PhDs done annually in the United States. So it's no longer a dinner party breaker. It's actually, you're just one of many. Probably every family has some contact who's called a doctor, who isn't a doctor, but is a doctor. So the standout has got to be more than just doing a PhD. It's going to be what is the value of that PhD beyond yourself, I believe. And there's a great danger, I feel, that one can go through a lot of hard work, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years in preparing your PhD, write your thesis, and then it's put on the university shelves and people move on. Funnily enough, I've come across, just at lunch breaks or other situations where I've heard academics talk to each other and to me, mentioning that they felt that their PhD was the best research they'd ever done. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, But if it's an indication, I would suggest to you, you want to mine that PhD, you want to maximize all the work you're doing for the betterment of everybody, and not just see it as a stepping stone, but actually as the launch pad. So your PhD is an oasis. It's an oasis from the point of view, if you're talking about pure research, there's lots of data like sand everywhere. But what you're doing is turning it into something, a fertile opportunity to enrich the world, mankind, and an understanding. It's also, from a social science point of view, can be quite cutting edge, ruthless, and a reflection on the world we have and the challenges we have. Funny enough, Oasis called themselves Oasis because they had a poster in one of the brothers' room on a leisure centre called the Oasis Leisure Centre in Swindon. That was their dream to play there. So it's all about capturing dreams and progression from there. But it's also, for those of us who are Australian, it is also a debt. We don't have to pay for our PhD, and we are using taxpayers' money to better knowledge and science. We owe the average person on the street a big thank you, and we have a responsibility to use their money wisely to make sure that we are bettering things. And I think that's also an important motivation to do a PhD, is to help Australia, help the world. And that should be a guide. If it's just that your thesis gathers dust, then isn't it, it's not a surprise, perhaps, that the man or lady in the pub might say, another PhD student, what did you do, etc. We need to try and maximize it. What's the value for me? Well, two things, critically. One was I had a belief that we could influence people. So my background is tourist accommodation. I had a small accommodation business, and I reached a green ceiling where I couldn't ask people to save any more. And because they didn't have the ability to do that. So I developed a prototype and we tested it in the PhD. And I wanted to demonstrate to the tourism sector that it was possible to involve the customer in reducing consumption. So I wanted evidence, and I wanted evidence scientific, and I wanted it to be underwritten, if you like, from a university. But I also wanted personal enlightenment. I was interested to understand the mechanics of how that could work and why it worked. But I also wanted, I also wanted the output to be a light bulb moment for all the people that were going to benefit from the information from my PhD. So that's what drove me. So what's the value of your PhD? Now, I can see I have a couple of thousand people in the audience here. So I'm going to just throw that question out there. Does anyone want to tell me what was the value of their PhD? Silence. Okay, so nobody had any value in their PhD. Well, there we go. Okay, you sure nobody wants to make a comment? Fair enough. So that's interesting. I would challenge you in the sense that surely your PhD had great value. You had to work super hard.
We've got a hand up here.
Sorry?
We've got someone. We've got a brave soul. Ross Westaby. Did you want to turn on your camera or your mic and start the conversation?
Sorry, just hold up. Yeah, so sorry. Right at the start of my PhD, I did my PhD in peace and conflict studies. I wanted to essentially put the Cambodian government on notice. That was my goal as an impact. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing it, and great work. So, you know, there's a particular value outside oneself that Ross was striving for. I'm sure succeeded. So now let's talk about improving. So we now know what the values are. You've thought about what the values are for you. Now, how can we improve those outcomes so you maximize that? So you want to, perhaps you don't like the term squeezing the most out of your PhD, but that's my colloquial English. But you want to get the most of all that hard work and make sure that you've had as much impact. Like Ross was describing, he wanted to change a political process. So obviously there is career potential in having a PhD. You can build your reputation. And that obviously helps to get further jobs, maybe in academia or in the commercial world. You can influence change, as Ross was describing. It can help improve your salary, although I'm reliably informed that most CEOs of large companies don't have PhDs. So I think that's how much more your salary can be improved is, I'm not aware exactly that figure. And it does have some status, therefore responsibility. But I would, in Australia, I feel that isn't the same as in a country like Germany or Austria or Switzerland, where it's highly regarded. And in Australia, we're more a level playing pitch, and people aren't necessarily going to give up their seat for you, or they're not. So there is career potential, but there's obviously the opportunity of helping society deliver key findings that will change or help to change society. And you can also develop some practical tools. There's also the whole point about progressing scientific learning and currently, questioning current work and adding to existing knowledge. Now, those are all obvious, but often we seem to think about only one of those. My point is that you can be looking at all of them simultaneously, or some of those simultaneously, whilst doing your PhD, not after your PhD, when you might be running out of energy. So for me, it helped me with my business, as I described. It helped me demonstrate to the industry that it could be possible to influence guests and to reduce consumption. And it was highly successful in terms of the results. And I was able to therefore talk to the industry on that basis. But it was also, as I went through the process of the PhD, it meant a great deal to me to see that my intervention was actually enriching the lives, maybe that's a bit strong, helping some of my colleagues, work colleagues, and some of the students that work with me, building their confidence, building their knowledge. I think that's really important. I had visiting students from the University of Surrey stay with me for a year at a time, and they benefited a lot, I believe, from what we were doing. And some of them now are pursuing successful careers in sustainable tourism. One is at TUI, one is an Exodus, for example. Exodus were both very large organizations. So I think it's also really important to see how you can help others. And it's about building community confidence. So where I was living at the time in Kangaroo Valley, a small rural community, I didn't go to the pub and tell everybody I was doing a PhD, because that wouldn't have gone down very well necessarily. But I was certainly telling them the findings from the PhD and giving them confidence to rethink about how they were approaching sustainability from their point of view. And to be honest, it gave me hope. And I dedicated my PhD and my book to my guests, because they all played the game of my intervention and helped make a considerable contribution to understanding the opportunities for sustainable tourism. So that was my way. So I see it much wider than just me in a career. So the questions that I have for you, because I thought this was the right way to run this presentation, because I wasn't sure the audience, the size of the audience and so on. So rather than wanting to ask me questions as I present, I'm going to stop at the end of each section and pose some questions to you so we can have a chat. So what is the improved outcome that you want from your PhD? Even if you don't want to ask me questions, I think it's really worthwhile noting some of these down. Is this for your career? Are you trying to help society? Are you trying to pursue learning? Some people have often said to me that I really like doing the PhD, I just like reading research, etc. Fine, but how is that going to progress your career? And how is that going to help society? And surely the Australian public would like value. So if there aren't any questions on this, please, you can ask me now or share with me what you feel is your improved outcomes. Or you can write it. I'll leave you my email address at the end. Or you can meet me tomorrow, which is the 8th of March. I'm here in Brisbane now. I think I'm actually in Gold Coast at an event for a gift. So if we're talking about improving your PhD, so that we're now saying, okay, we know what the value is, we know what our value is, and we know what we're trying to get from it and deliver wider, then we need to think about how we're going to target our communication, how we're going to target what our output is to the relevant people. And generally, when people are writing a PhD, you might say, well, who am I writing this for? I'm writing it for me and my supervisors and the examiners. Hopefully I can get some academic papers out of it. That might be it. Well, I don't really think that's sufficient in terms of where you could use all that hard work to make a big difference. So I would recommend we look at multiple targets and you think about that as you prepare your work. After all, and again, I emphasize that my expertise, well, not my expertise, my experience is in social science, but I think a lot of white papers, grey papers, blogs, etc., are important to note while writing and preparing your PhD, and therefore those would represent sources of inspiration to help you progress what you want to do and what you want to target. So from my side, I approached a lot of different people from the inception and afterwards. I talked to, as you can see, industry bodies and so on. So how on earth can I contact the Lake District Foundation, which is in Cumbria, England, from my little property in Kangaroo Valley, New South Wales? Well, it's through contacts, through mentors, and then understanding that there's this group, this charitable group that's interested in sustainability, interested in sustainable tourism. And so I emailed them and used Zoom. And they were interested in the findings and helped me identify potential sites that I could use in the future, but I could also share knowledge and insights with them. The cost of doing that is minimal, obviously, by using modern technology. I also signed up to the United Nations Environment Programme's One Planet initiative and became a partner. And then I wrote reports during the PhD and afterwards that talked about my intervention and the findings from a perspective of that audience. So it's not just tourism, it's a wide base around the world of people interested in progressing sustainability and sustainable development as well. I was invited to join an academic network. I contacted the Peak Industry Group, which is Sustainability Hospitality Alliance, and I'm going to be doing a series of podcasts with them. I saw the opportunity from the newspapers that the City of Sydney was progressing a sustainability agenda, so I approached them and became an associate partner because I wasn't living in Sydney. I managed to raise funds from them. I've been at conferences in Dubai, London, and through ITV Berlin in Germany. So I spoke to a lot of people outside just the academic world, but it included academic people who are very knowledgeable and gave me good sounding boards, work of sounding boards. So that goes back to Alexandra and Susanna, who have obviously been fantastic mentors, but also I've been talking to people like Professor Harold Goodwin, who's an expert on responsible tourism. He was my mentor for my master's. I kept in touch with him. He's been very helpful. All these people are, as I say, good sounding boards, but they also are looking at what the industry is doing, what the people are doing, and it gives you inspiration and ideas, which you can then take further on. It's always good to discuss with people, especially people who deeply understand what you're doing, so you can see where you can stretch the value of what you're producing to do social good, scientific good. So for those of you that are now doing a PhD, working it, I think the question is, who are the targets that you want to reach? So if you're now poised with pen on paper thinking, okay, who are the targets? I would suggest, what did you learn from what I just talked about? Well, I picked on industry peak bodies. I identified smaller organizations, NGOs, that were interested in my subject and were pursuing their own agenda, but we might be able to collaborate. There were conferences, outside academic conferences. And I think that's really, really important. There tends to be this area of academic conferences and industry conferences. And so academic knowledge doesn't trickle through very easily to the everyday world of commerce. And yet, our skill should surely be to communicate our scientific findings in a manner that everyday life can use. So I would encourage you to look at those conferences. How do you find them? Through the peak bodies, through their newsletters, social media. It's so much easier now than when I was your age, when it would be improbable for me to have done the project that I'm doing now, and that technology. You can speak to the world. And if you're focusing on a very specialist narrow area, which obviously you will be, then the number of people that will be sympathetic to what you're saying will be quite small, but globally enough of a mass for you to get some traction. So do think outside Australia. So we now thought about our targets. So how can we get them to hear us? How can we get them to actually think about what we're saying? You don't need me to tell you that it's a busy world. And, you know, if you try to ring up a company and have a chat with somebody, it's very hard to actually get through to anybody. They're too busy, they're short-staffed. If you want to talk to the public and their lives, often it's dual income families, they don't have any time either. And politicians and so forth are usually looking for sound bites, meaning that it's on the agenda of today rather than, shall we say, visions of the next 20 years. And so it's very tricky. So it's better, rather than trying to talk to them direct sometimes, it's through the social media groups. LinkedIn is fabulous. It's a very useful mechanism to find serious people who are like-minded with yourself, but maybe acting within the sphere, either in the commercial world or research world and so forth. And then with your mentors, they can recommend people. You can either run workshops or attend workshops. And overall, as I think you're probably getting a sense that I really believe in serendipity. You can plan so much in your life, but if you over-plan and over-cautious, then fate doesn't have a hand. And I wouldn't be married today because I wouldn't have been outside an airport at 2:15 in the morning and meeting my future wife. It's not all, it's just by fate. So that's an example, a personal example, but I mean, it's true to say that you might visit a business or an institution and there happens to be somebody else there at that time. That then leads on to another conversation. You're not going to go and find a partner if you don't first go out and dance on the dance floor. If you just sit on a chair in the corner, you're not going to really see or gain the opportunity that you want. So we really need to try and make a bit of a breakthrough there, and you've got to allow serendipity. So I'm sorry, this is probably going to come across as a bit egotistical. I'm just trying to show you some examples of what I've done. I'm sure that you're all much, much brighter than me, and you will do much greater things. These are just pictures and some examples. Don't be daunted by them. You'll achieve far more than what I have and will be able to do in my time. But I'm simply trying to point out that a dyslexic guy with a small B&B can do this. You guys will be able to go much further if you draw on your PhD and really maximize it. So there's me with Clover Moore signing a commitment for her program on sustainability in Sydney. There's the academic work that I do outside academia, if you like, with other academics. The intervention that I developed got as far as a white paper inside the General Assembly of the UN with some recommendations. I have to tell you, I wasn't rung up immediately afterwards, but it does give one a sense of well-being that, yeah, we are doing our best here. I will make the point on the photograph at the bottom that there's me. Yes, I'm talking at the World Travel Market, but I'm talking alongside the Minister of Tourism from India, the head of leisure research from YouGov, the operations director from EasyJet, the head of sustainability worldwide from Booking.com, and the BBC interviewer. So you can easily, with your area of specialty, get onto a platform like that with various keys that I've already indicated. Mentors help, content help, changing your PhD's content or translating it for the everyday world allows you to make a contribution. And that helps to build your brand. And we were twice, the intervention was twice selected by the UN as their leading sustainability or sustainable tourism example worldwide. So I think it's worthwhile for you to start to map out who are your audiences and how will you cut through with them? What channels? And you may not be able to answer that right now, but it should be the back of your pad, you know, when you get ideas to note them down when you see blog sites. Good to structure it. I'm sure most of you are very systematic, organized people and used to spreadsheets, etc., etc. There's no harm in structuring this. Don't feel awkward about it, that this isn't really academia and so on. We owe the Australian people a big thank you for their trust in us to deliver something of value. So I don't think preparing a couple of charts and putting ideas down is the wrong thing to do. And it's not going to take away from the purist point of view of your research, but it is going to distribute your thoughts and findings as widely as possible to help, which we need to make it a better world, and it really needs to be, effort needs to be accelerated. And I think really, as you can see, don't wait until you've done your PhD. It's a big job doing one, but it's a bit of a challenge when you finish, because when you're in that race and to get it done on time, it takes not a superhuman effort, but it takes a lot of effort to muster the energy to go through further revisions and to complete that thesis. And you're going to be possibly a little bit tired at the end of it, but there is also the possibility of a little anticlimax after 2, 3, 4, 5 years of work. But there it is, and what happens next? And you'll see others running past you with all their ideas who are progressing and think, oh, I did that, so now what? That's why I think it's really important to integrate what you're doing for your PhD into a bigger vision, master plan, thoughts, for you to exploit it further, to maximize it further, so that it maintains. So here's the story, to give you an example. I've just come back from India, and it's a lovely story where a boy is given a calf to carry on his shoulders up the stairs to the house every day. And as the boy grows older, so does the calf. And in the end, the young man is able to carry a cow. He didn't realize the change in the weight of the calf because he's growing as the calf is. So the point being, that analogy is that if you start, even if you're 3/4 of the way through your PhD, if you start now and just add little pieces at a time, it won't seem so irksome as you build it, because your enthusiasm and excitement of actually distributing the work and effort that you've put in will propel you. And that extra half an hour at the end of the day before a glass of wine, beer, chamomile tea, whatever it might be, it's perfectly possible because there is value in what you're doing and you can see it, and that will help motivate you. So my approach was to use the key findings, because all the time I'm trying to challenge existing thinking about tourism, or really the service sector, where the provider of those services cannot ask the customer to co-create a more sustainable experience, to make it more sustainable, which of course is rubbish, because you can go to cafes now, bring your own mug, you might get a discount for your coffee, but you can do it. But in tourist accommodation, it's a challenge. So for me, I wanted to demonstrate there were some bigger issues and that we needed to recognize those and to help make change happen. So I'm not going to read out that little shopping list, but there are some examples that you get from your literature review, which is a really fabulous foundation for your PhD, that you might not put very much of it into your PhD, but still sticks with you. And for me, findings like that hotels are the second most energy intensive building type in the world, as you can see, I haven't forgotten it. I haven't forgotten a lot of the small snippets, but those help me win arguments, help me propose arguments, And I put those through all those things that you can see that I've been applying. And I really would, it's not just cramming that that literature review into 10,000, 20,000 words, whatever it might be, and getting a paper out of it. It's all the reading you've done, all the additional notes that will allow your mind to keep thinking, but there's this and this. But even though it's not answering your PhD's question, it can be used to help propel you as an expert, a key influencer, and justify what you're doing in other situations like conferences and so forth. So always very valuable, and I strongly recommend that you, even if you don't use all those findings, you remember them, you put them down somewhere useful. They become particularly useful when you're trying to apply for grants. So during the PhD, I applied for a minimum viable product grant from the New South Wales government, because that's where I was living. And during the PhD, I was sounding out, can I commercialize my intervention? And I met regional representative for that. And after my PhD, I worked with Susanna, Alexandra, and now Stefan to utilize the intervention to help further things using an ARC grant, Australian Research Council grant. Excluding that grant, which is Griffiths, my other grants that I managed to generate have been over $500,000. So think what you can do. Think what you can do with your PhD and how you can raise funds to further what you want to do, or help the institution you're working with raise funds to progress it further. But focusing on your area of expertise is perfectly possible. I stress that even an old dyslexic bloke can do that. Think what you bright young people can achieve. You can definitely really get some great cut through. So what are you going to do before the end of it, before you finish the PhD? How are you going to use all that hard work you've already put in, all those extra pieces of work that you've written but haven't actually put into the thesis? How can you maximize that? Again, I've explained to you about cutting through the daily noise, targeting. So think about strategies by utilizing that information. I know it's a bit of a modern term and Americanization. I think it's American, or Englishization, should we say. But unfortunately, we are brands to some extent. When people see you, they go, that's the bloke who's all about accommodation, sustainability, or whatever it might be. So you are given a label. So you might as well use that to your advantage and be known as the expert in this specific subject. Go back to that graph which showed you all these new PhD students, which is just mushrooming. How are you going to stand out from the crowd? If it's true from the academics that I've listened to say their PhD was the best research they'd ever did, most unique, then why stray away from what was the essence of that? Why move away from your area of great knowledge that you can build on, so that you can stand out as being different? Because if we are labeled and are brands, then the supermarket shelf of tins of tomato has thousands of different brands. How is your brand going to stand out? Because you're not in a tin, you're in a cardboard reusable box. Right? You are different. So we need to see how to do that. So I really urge you to be a specialist. So if your subject is butterflies in Patagonia, then after you've done your PhD, why leave that? Why not explore more about it? It's just an example. I don't know anything about butterflies or Patagonia, but you get the idea that you don't need necessarily to stray so far away from your expertise, because somebody somewhere in the world will want to know more about that, and it will have a serendipity opportunity for you to exploit that further. So be a specialist, not a generalist. You don't want to look the same as everyone else, i.e. just producing the same material in the same way, because they won't have any standout. So what does that mean? Yes, academic papers are important, but there are other ways of communicating which you know better than I do, in the modern way of communicating that you should consider and specialize in that. Podcasts, for example, rather than video content, is an art form in itself and don't sound the same. So that you're looking at the world in a different way, and I shall demonstrate that in a moment. If you're wondering who that is, that's Tiny Tim. Please do go on to YouTube and listen to Tiny Tim's Walking Through the Tulips, and then you'll understand what I mean. People loved it in the 60s. You probably think it's crazy now, but the point is he was unique. And Oasis was certainly semi-unique. Mozart was unique. So the way that you communicate has to be special to you. So what have I done? Yes, I've done the papers, but you'll also see there's the UNWTO, and I've done a number of other ways of communicating my PhD findings. And I put those into a book. Now, I don't want to take a lot of time up now because I'm sure you'll ask questions and so on, but the book I've written, the book, what I wrote, is not a regurgitation of my PhD. It's not taking all that PhD and just cramming it into a book and saying, here, I've done a book. I've completely rewritten the whole thing, and I've written it in the first person, and I've used 400 research examples, but to demonstrate my argument, and I try to make it as personal and reflect my personal journey in order to have a uniqueness and a standout, because the field I'm working in is still embryonic, and I'm trying to reach out to people on a personal level to give them confidence. Because the truth is, people don't really want to read anything. Academic papers or regurgitating academic papers is not on your wider audience going to be read because it's too much. Even a book of 100,077 words is too much. So I didn't write it expecting everyone to read it from A to Z. They can just dip in and out of it. I've styled the whole book that way. Just as an aside, as a tip, it obviously sounds daunting to write. Actually, it was a real joy to write, and I find writing hard. Because what I did was I worked out the chapters, I got sticky notes, put the chapter headings, and then I put the arguments out on different colored paper. So for example, red was scientific example, green was a case study, blue was a personal comment. And I went through each chapter, and under each chapter heading had these different color sticky notes, and I broke everything down, trying to keep it to 150 words, 300 words for each of those subsections. And as I say, wrote it from the heart. And so therefore, it was not so hard to write, but it was quite possible to draw on one's own passion to do that. How did I get to be published? So it's not independently published, it's published through a reputable publisher, Goodfellow Publishing, because it was through a mentor who said, this can be part of our Responsible Tourism series. And I met the publisher with the mentor, and they said yes, which meant I didn't have to go to any cost of producing the book. And I don't think I'm going to make a lot of money from it, unless you will buy some copies. But it's very affordable to do it that way, because if I independently published it, there's a cost in actually putting all that together and typesetting it and making it look right. And you also want the kudos of saying, this is independently published. This is published by a recognized academic publisher, not independently published. So the only problem was I had a bit of an argument over the cover picture. But anyway, we got there in the end. My mentors were able to write reviews of the book, but also I asked industry people to write reviews of the book. So it covers people from Disney, ex-UN, opinion leaders, thought leaders, academics. So I've got a whole range of people that are helping to spruik the book, which also helps to differentiate what I'm trying to do. And using all the PhD has helped me my team now with the intervention to win the Banksia Award, Sustainability Award. It helps me when, with those two letters in front of your name, to visit, for me, to visit tourist accommodation properties all around the world. So it's a door opener, which furthers my knowledge, but it's a knowledge exchange builds my reputation. So there's an engineer I was talking to, that's his water purifying plant in a hotel in India, and I'm able to be invited to conferences and make a real difference, often to poorer communities or not so poor communities, but to try and make a difference within that. And it's not just the presentation you make, it's the conversations you have around the conference that really helps to change people's perception. Because often there's so many people talking that people can fall asleep or not hear. So it's really after you've done all those presentations, you then talk to John Smith and you say, John, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? Oh, so that's what you're doing. And then you can have 20 minutes and then you can help transfer that knowledge, but interest people in what you're doing. So to be a key person of influence, you need to think, how are you going to do that? A book can be helpful. You're not going to make a lot of money in it, but if the book's crafted in a unique way, it can help propel you. Those, for what I'm doing there, I'm doing podcasts with peak bodies, with industry leaders and the UN. So that will help to spread the message from my PhD to an international audience. So, in summary, think a bit more about what the value of your PhD is. And if you're a domestic student, respect the people who are paying for it and think about what you owe them, so that when you do meet them in the pub and they think, oh, just another PhD student, they will be proud to have known that they've supported your research. Build that reputation and make sure your research is responsible and it's applied widely, or the communication from research is communicated as widely as possible to make that difference. Don't talk about targeting just the supervisors and the examiners. There's a whole world out there that needs to know what you're doing. So you need to think about who you're going to reach in order for it to be distributed further. And think about those targets and how you can build that relationship and what ways you communicate to them. I think podcasts are really a great opportunity now because, you know, the trouble with this sort of thing like video is you might be just thinking you're watching me on telly and making a cup of tea and having some toast. Whereas in a podcast, you have to use, because you can't see me, you have to use more of your brain and you have to be a bit more thinking. And so I think podcasts, if you have a good MC within that, can be really quite dynamic. And don't wait until the end. Start straight away, start straight after watching this video, make notes and put in half an hour a day, if you can, to start thinking about how you can maximize it, or else it will be dust on the shelf. And be a key person of influence in your specialist field, not a generalist. Now, I wish you all the very best of luck. My parting point is, as you've noticed, this isn't a Griffith University presentation. I put my brand throughout. So from a PhD, I've been able to build a small micro business and trying to make a difference with further government help from this great country where it is a land of opportunity. So don't give up at the end and think that's job done. Keep progressing, pay your respects back to the people and the university and maximize the value of what you've got, because what you're doing is unique and there's going to be a big need for it, but they won't discover it unless you shout about it in the politest way possible. So best of luck, everyone. Oh, are there any questions?
Thank you very much.